Welcome. You're watching Primetime Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. So details about the Congress's minimum income guarantee scheme are still pretty sketchy. But from what we know, there is a promise of a payout of 72,000 rupees per year to 20% of the poorest households in India. The promise comes right before a big general election and should of course be seen in that context. But the fact is that over the last few years, a number of big welfare schemes have been announced, be it PM Kisan, the Ujjwala Yojana or Raitu Bandhu in Telangana. These are some examples. So how well do such schemes work? And is the Congress income guarantee scheme feasible at all? To speak on this, I'm joined now by Radhika Pandey, economist at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Madan Sabnavis, chief economist at Care Ratings, and Narendar Pani, professor at National Institute of Advanced Studies. So, of course, I've got economists to weigh in on something which is a political issue as well, but I'm sure all of our panelists today will see it in every angle and context. Welcome to all of you, and Radhika, Pandey, let me start with you. First, your initial view on the scheme. Now, clearly in pre-election season, one side is going to call this a game changer and a breakthrough assault on poverty. The other side is going to say this is a bluff, this is not doable, it will ruin our economy. Where do you stand on a purely social and economic stand?
See, in principle, the scheme is very good because, whenever we have such schemes of direct income transfer to targeted poor, these are relatively less distortionary as compared to the other kind of so-called welfare schemes like farm loan waiver and the other kind of scheme. So in principle, by design, this is the most ideal form of support to the targeted poor. Having said that, there are questions on the details of the scheme. It's not yet clear whether the target is 72,000 per annum or the target is 12,000 per month. The deeper question is what are the fiscal implications and how the scheme would be fiscally managed. Whether it would be at the cost of other welfare schemes, would it be at the cost of other public sector investment programs, or ideally it should be the other rationalization of subsidies. So all those schemes, all those things are not clear about the fiscal implications of such scheme, but by design it is the least distortionary as compared to the other kind of support given to the poor.
Now some people have been arguing, against the scheme on a very basic level, and let Mr. Sabnavis come in on that, which is that to grow an economy, should you be providing opportunities to people to work or just literally give them cash? And that seems to be a problem some people have with the scheme, though I must add these a lot of them seem to be people from the kind of economic class which may not be suffering that kind of poverty. But as a concept, Mr. Sabnavis, do you think that there is a case for this argument that why not give people an opportunity to work instead of just giving them money?
No, I think I'll agree with you out here that ideally one should be providing employment rather than giving cash. But we have seen that in the past, various government schemes to generate employment have not quite delivered the kind of results which were required. For example, you look at the NYAY scheme, which has been fairly popular. It has been effective to a certain extent, but we have seen that that hasn't really alleviated poverty to any great extent. So therefore, I think in the absence of the government having the ability to deliver employment by creating jobs for all those who require it, I think a cash transfer appears to be a more direct effort. And in case it's implemented properly without too many leakages, or if it's targeted well, then I think it will be delivering the result. Because ultimately, we see how can the government really provide jobs. I think it's quite difficult because you can't really provide productive jobs because I need to have the public sector expand. And today we're really talking about curtailing the scope of the public sector. You look at the central government, you look at the state governments, you look at the public sector banks, all of them are really cutting down on employment. So in which case, I think the best alternative in the absence of these opportunities is to provide cash. And if you're able to do it within the realm of the FRBM norms, I really don't see any harm in it. especially so since we ideologically believe that DBT is good, universal basic income is good. So I think what the Congress has done is they've put a number to it. It does look a bit startling to begin with, but if it can be managed from within the budget, then I think it's fairly good.
Okay, so let's come to the number. 12,000 rupees per month is what they've said is the cutoff. Though, you know, like Radhika pointed out, it's not clear whether the ceiling is 72,000 rupees a year, which works out to 6,000 rupees a month. Will it be more? Will it be less? What if someone's family income is 4,000 rupees? Do they get 8,000 more? Can you, and what will be the database? Narendar, Pani, what are the questions that come to mind on some of these details, which are important?
You know, the main thing that we need to keep in mind is that this is not quite a universal basic income scheme. It's a scheme that sort of bridges the gap between what they earn and the minimum that is now being promised. And I think that is an important difference, because if you have a economy growing with enough jobs for the poor, the amount that you have to spend would be much less. So the pressure on the government to actually generate the funds for that would be much less.
Okay, and what do we think, Professor Pani, of the 12,000 rupee cutoff?
You see, the 12,000 rupee cutoff by itself, the way I read it, is 12,000 a month with a maximum of 70,000 a year, which may or may not be what the Congress meant. But if you take that, it is
fix that line, Professor Pani. We'll try and fix that line and come back to you, because we can't quite tell what you're saying. Let me take that question to Radhika Pandey. The 12,000 rupee cutoff and how that would really work. They've taken an average, the Congress has taken an average in their calculation of 6,000 rupees as an annual income per month for households in the bottom 20%. Do you think that that kind of cutoff makes sense?
See, there are a lot of assumptions in this number. Firstly, how will any government identify the poor people? How there is no credible database on identifying the specific income levels of individuals as well as of household. So there is an assumption made in this analysis, in this proposal, that for the bottom 20% of the population, they are already earning 6,000 per month. So they will be provided 6,000 per month more, so that they at least earn 12,000 per month. But then again, that is inconsistent with the 72,000 per annum mark that the scheme proposes. So there are a lot of loopholes, there are a lot of there's lack of clarification on what is exactly that they are targeting. But the main loophole is how the targeted poor would be identified. Whether they will be, what will be the criteria of identifying poor in the rural areas, what will be the criteria for identifying poor in the urban areas. Also, if we, this 5 crore number is again questionable, because if we look at, we have also done similar analysis. If we look at the CMI data, which was the CMI household survey data, as per our analysis, if we look at the number of families earning less than 72,000 per annum, we find that there are around 3 crore such families, such households. So there are a lot of assumptions that have gone into this analysis. But as I said, the main the loophole or the main challenge is how the targeted poor would be identified.
Let me come to that with Mr. Sabnavis. How do you identify the targeted poor? Now, some reports say, though there is no official version yet on this from the Congress party, that the 2011 census has been taken as a base. So is that accurate enough to determine a household income? Now, all of these incomes are unlikely to be, with pakka bills or receipts. There may be some cash transfers. They may be varying from month to month. So how do you keep a track of all of this?
No, I agree. It is a challenge to identify the poor. But if you go back to the Ayushman scheme of the Prime Minister, I think out there they have a criteria where you look at the 2011 census, and at that particular point of time, when you were interviewed, you would have told about what kind of assets you own, what kind of income you're earning. So that seems to be the starting point. But I think we shouldn't get bogged down by about how exactly it will be done, because I'm quite sure once we have a scheme in place, there will also be a way in which we'll find out about who the targeted poor are. Now, onto this issue of 6,000 plus 6,000, 12,000, I think one of the Congress members who worked on this particular number has actually clarified that it's assumed today that a poor person is actually, a poor family is earning 6,000 rupees per month. And what the government or what the Congress promises is something like a top-up of 6,000. So it'll be 72,000 rupees provided by the government, if at all it comes to power, plus the 72,000 which are already earning. So we're really talking in terms of something like 1.44 lakhs per a family of poor. So on the issue of, just to reiterate again about identification, I think that's something which will always, we won't get right in the first instance. It will happen over a period of time. There will definitely be problems of identification. There will be lots of leakages. There will be corruption about who enters, who doesn't enter. But these are the kinds of things which we'll have to live with in this kind of system. But I think as long as we set forward such a in motion, such a scheme, I think that would be fair enough.
And do we all agree it's the need of the hour, or is it more of an election bluff? Professor Pani, we have you back on the line. Would you like to come in on this point?
Yes, from what little I could pick up the poor connection, I think the basic issue that we need to keep in mind is that this is a dynamic program, in the sense that it only argues that it will fill up the gap between the income and what is being promised. If the economy does well, and more important, if the jobs are created for the poor, the demands on the scheme would naturally go down. We can quibble about the numbers, and I doubt if we'll ever get a perfect estimate of the poor or how much would go. But if we can focus on the fact that the more jobs you get, the less people will be dependent on the scheme, less the outgo from the scheme. That's an important factor, because that will come to a direct targeting of the idea of jobless growth. And that is for the first time since 1991 that we are thinking on those terms.
But you'll also have to have some kind of real life or real time tracking in that case. Radhika Pandey, let me come to you on that, because the idea is that if a family crosses the 12,000 rupees a month threshold, they automatically then come out of the ambit of this scheme. That could happen one month, it may not the next.
Right.
How would you track this?
Right. Yeah, so that is a challenge, because by very nature the scheme is dynamic. There are people who would be earning, and for some profession they're seasonal. So for some months they would be earning more than 12,000, so they are outside the ambit of this scheme. And then for some months when they're, for example, the farmers are not getting much of income, so then they will be within the remit of the scheme. So all these are challenges, and that would require some time, that would require proper state central coordination, that would require a proper database of income levels, and it cannot be implemented in the short run. It would be ideally be required to implement it on a pilot basis, and then see what are the challenges in its implementation, and then carry it forward.
Another couple of points I think that we should look over is, does this mean subsuming other subsidies? Now, back of the envelope calculation and by simple multiplication has come to 3.6 lakh crore rupees as a payout of this. Some have calculated it as at 1.5% of the GDP. Now, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley yesterday said that among all the various schemes that the government is implementing right now, families are already, there's already a payout of 7.8 lakh crore rupees. So let me come to Mr. Sabnavis on this. Would this mean cutting down on some other existing schemes? Would you have to raise taxes? Politically, it would be very difficult to cut out on any, current subsidy.
No, I think they will definitely merge certain social welfare schemes. So as was mentioned by you, I think there are over 7 lakh crores of such kind of social welfare schemes which are already in motion. So we also have the NYAY program, you have the insurance programs, both for farmers as well as for health. So actually, if I'm giving you a kind of a cash transfer, logically I should say that I'm giving you money and you can use it the way you want to. So therefore you can pay for your own premium for health, you can pay it for your crop. Similarly, in terms of food subsidy, I think we already have the DBT, which has been done on a pilot basis in certain districts. So this can also be made a bit more universal, and the money can be given. So I think it will have to be a combination of certain fresh infusion of funds under this particular scheme, like what the Prime Minister has done in the budget for the 75,000 crore rupee scheme, where the provision has been made. But since this number is really large, and if we are going to stick to the 3.2, 3.4% fiscal deficit number, it will not be possible to actually generate this kind of money. I think the other thing will be to get rid of some of the existing schemes and put it all into this minimum income scheme.
Okay, and the formula right now seems to be, states and the centre sharing the fiscal burdens, and that's always tricky terrain, isn't it, Professor Pani? Like we're seeing that with PM Kisan, where the BJP-ruled government is saying Congress states are not implementing it. It could be vice versa. And the moment you go into that state centre sharing the burden terrain, it always becomes a little more difficult to implement, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think we tend to be overstating it. Let's go back to the question of how do you identify the poor. We have a scheme like NYAY, which has a self-identification of the poor, because the persons who are willing to do their job would only be the poor, because it involves manual labor. Now, if you have such a scheme in place, it cannot be replaced by a dole like this, because for the simple reason that if the earnings from NYAY goes down, the family income goes down, and the more will be able to be paid out as a dole. So what you really need is a system of expansion where you take into account how much a family receives from the government already, and then add on however much you want in a predetermined fashion. And if you create a scheme like that, it's very likely that the non-poor would not want to be a part of it, as has happened in the case of NYAY. So I think it's important that you use what knowledge we already have of the working of welfare schemes, the amount that goes to the poor, and then top up to the extent you want, maybe even more than what has been promised per family. But when it's done in addition to what already goes to them, I think you'll find that that the additional amounts that are required are not as substantial as is being calculated now, which is as if the entire amount has to be paid by the government, irrespective of what families are already getting, and irrespective of whether it's a good year with employment or one in which there is no employment. I think we need to think this through a little more rather than taking these calculations at face value.
Well, fair enough. These might be the outer limits of calculations. Radhika Pandey wanted to come in with a point. Yes, Radhika.
Yeah, the same thing that, 3.6 lakh crore could be the outer limit, depending upon the nature of the scheme. If it is more of in the nature of a top-up for families who are already earning, say, more than 6,000, there the amount of contribution would be lesser. So the fiscal burden would actually vary depending on the income composition, and there could be ways of identifying the state-central cooperation and the tax burden that would be shared. What would be required is to do a thorough rethink of all the schemes that are currently in place, and then identify which of the schemes could be merged, which of the schemes could be rationalized, which are not, benefiting the targeted poor, that are more towards, that are more benefiting the, relatively not so poor, and then come up with a tax burden sharing mechanism.
So, taking that into consideration, if I put the basic question that can we afford it? Can we fiscally afford it? Radhika, what would you say?
We can fiscally afford it if we think of rationalizing the existing subsidies. And the other challenge is that we should not be sacrificing on the other productive investment that is going on. For example, it should not be that, we have to take a politically tough call of rationalizing subsidies, so we don't do that. But, we take the easier route of cutting some of the productive investments or cutting infra spending. So as we see that over the last few years, government has been hand-holding infrastructure investment, which is very important for generating employment potential. and going forward, this cannot be a final assault on poverty. We need to have productive employment opportunities. We need to have infrastructure. We need to have construction sector picking up well. So those sectors should not be, the expenditure on those sectors should not be cut at the cost of, to provide income support and to make this scheme feasible. What is important is to look at the subsidies and to rationalize the subsidies, to rationalize some of the tax concession such that the scheme gets feasible. So it is very much feasible without losing sight of the fiscal trajectory. But at the same time, the risk is that it should not be at the cost of cutting down on the productive investment and not going bypassing the fiscal trajectory, because that would then lead to higher public debt, higher interest rates, which would in the medium to long run harm the poor the most.
That same question to you, Madan Sabnavis, because that's the biggest counter to it right now, that the fiscal deficit would balloon, the balance would be lost, and can we afford it really?
No, I don't think the government, I think we have seen in the past, both the UPA and the NDA, they have always paid obeisance to the FRBM rules, and there's always just intent to move towards 3%. So I don't think, even in case the Congress does come to power and they bring in this particular scheme, that they're going to breach those particular marks. And we should look at it that when we're talking of 3.5 lakh crores, to my mind, it's going to be more staggered over a period of time. Because if we just look at what happened between 18-19 budget and 19-20 budget, the overall increase in the size of the budget is around 3.5 lakh crores, which means that if at the first shot in the first year, we'll have to go and provide all the 5 crore families this particular amount, the entire money will get exhausted this way. And I don't think no government is ever going to work on this particular basis. So it's more likely to be staggered over a period of 3 to 4 years. And there will be a merger of certain existing schemes, things which were delivering a similar kind of benefits. And on the issue of productive, non-unproductive, I have a slightly different view, because even when we're giving cash to people, we should remember that this money is going to be spent essentially on consumption, and they're going to create demand for other products, both for food and non-food products. So I don't think about this as a very negative thing when you're giving cash to people, because the money is not going to be hoarded, it is going to be spent, which in the final run, when given the fact that we have a demand side problem in the economy today, it will be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there are claims made that this will remonetize the economy as well. Professor Pani, last word to you. Can we afford it?
Yes, certainly. I think more than, if you look at it in a way that if you get the right kind of growth, if you get the growth that provides jobs for the poorest, and we're talking of jobs that are just provide them 72,000 a year, if you're talking about that minimal level of jobs, I think any decent, sensitive growth strategy should aim at put that as its priority. And the moment that is achieved, the cost of the scheme virtually disappears. So I think it's important to recognize what our growth priorities are. We've gone too long with the idea that it's okay if we get jobless growth. I think we must recognize that one of our main priorities of growth itself is to provide a basic minimum, a minimum income which is guaranteed, which is less than what the World Bank says is the poverty line. And if we cannot even provide that, what's the point of being the third largest economy in the world? I think if we recognize that, then we can find the technical ways of raising the funds to meet the budget requirements.
Well, in a sense, a minimum income scheme is a penalty for jobless growth. Because people still need to subsist. Thank you so much to all of you for coming in with your views on this subject, and to all of you for watching as well. Please do tell us what you think about all the comments you've heard here today and your own views on this minimum income guarantee scheme. Thank you for watching.